how do I blah, 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 blah? And then you answer that question, and all of a sudden somebody else has a question. And then somebody else has a question. What's the dynamic going on there? Do you see that with the little kids too?
Yeah, I think it's really just that kind of like social norming of once you get people to start asking questions, once you get that dialogue going, you're going to get it from everybody else.
Welcome to 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. We're a father-son leadership podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems. And gosh, it took a little long, so hopefully we're there for the my signal that usually comes up. And it just reminded me. So, part of my morning routine is to watch our local news channel, Fox 21. And I don't know if they were doing some sort of, hey, if you're a nonprofit, we'll give you a discount sort of thing and you can advertise on us. And the reason this is sticking in my head is because I'm picky about this stuff. Because we're on public view all the time, with Tribe and Purpose and our leadership system, all these sort of things, right? And I'm watching this one guy, and I'd never seen the guy before. It's one guy. It's got some stuff, junk in the screen, and said something about a radio station. And he had a T-shirt on, and he was reading the script down below the camera, and then occasionally looking up, and occasionally looking up. And to add to it, it wasn't crisp and clear. So it probably wasn't even 4K. And then the military guy and me came out, and the T-shirt he had on, the sleeve, how your T-shirt, the seam flipped up, that was flipped up too. It's like, dude, you're pitching this thing to save the dogs or something. It had something to do with puppies. But I couldn't get past the ad sucking. And I was like, gosh,
that's bad.
I hope they didn't pay for it. That's the only thing I can say. I hope whatever that nonprofit was didn't pay for it. Golly, fellas.
You don't got to throw a suit on to go on TV. I mean, I would to go on TV, but you got to do a little bit of something. You can't mess all 4 or 5 things up. It's like if you had a what's it called, a media training guy come in and tell you, hey, what do you want to do when I'm on here so that people come to my nonprofit? It's like, okay, hey, you don't want to be reading from a script. You don't want to be looking down. You want to be looking up at the camera. Wear something nice. If you're not going to wear something nice, make sure at least it fits nice and it's sitting nice. And yeah, that just distracts from the message. And, I think kind of to a little bit of the business point on that, beyond just presentation, those kind of things, you can do, there's certain aspects of like the informality that I think can work. And people forget that you still have to have some level of formality because you are going out trying to get money from people. Yeah, you're the T-shirt guy who plays with puppies. That's okay. But if you're asking for money, come on, wear your nice T-shirt at least, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's just take the moment and just do a check. Even if it's like, here's what I do before I go to the recording studio across the way. Convert
over yonder.
Yeah, convert the dining room into the recording studio by taking down the tapestry picture of the tree of life and rearranging lights and things like that. And poof, got a recording studio. But you know what I do before I hit recording? Is I go to the bathroom right here. I don't mean just to pee. I do what I would usually call a vanity check. All right. Do I got any weird hair? Is my shirt weird? Or any, nose hairs, great big ear hair sticking out, whatever.
Yep.
And just do a quick check. And, it just shows, it doesn't take long. And it just shows that I care about making sure it's right. And that's, that's such an important thing that I think as leaders, we got to do those things. We've got to check ourselves. We've got to check our teams.
Got to
The
ask the
more,
right questions.
yeah. Well, that's what I was getting to. In the military, we do something called PCIs,
Mm.
pre-combat inspection, PCCs, pre-combat checks. Kind of synonymous. Uh, the theory of the PCCs, the pre-combat checks, is that you're checking your own gear, and the PCI is your immediate supervisor, fire team leader, squad leader, platoon sergeant, whatever, is checking your gear to make sure spot checking, because what gets checked gets done, and part of that checking in that sense is, well, what are we doing? Asking those questions of the guys. So it's not just, is your uniform correct and you have the right gear? Why do you have the right gear for what you're doing? Just like I was talking about setting up the studio, I do a check. What's it look like? I put the phone up, my camera, which still haven't figured out why I would pay money for a camera when I got it all on my phone. Very, very expensive. High
I'm
level.
sure once we get a little bit bigger, somebody will want us to pay them to tell us the answer to that question.
Yeah, maybe, but you know what? I've seen local news reporters out there with the same dadgum tripod and phone holder that I got doing a self recording on the site. I mean, if the news channels ain't needing it, then why should I? But anyway, I do all that check, and then I ask myself, hey, how's that look? Did I put that light back in the right spot? Maybe last time I did it here, and there was a little bit of a glare, kind of like we're getting today, because I forgot to close the shades, but it doesn't make any difference because the sun comes through those white blinds anyways. But it's that sort of a sense of, well, how do I look, and what do I need to do to make sure that I present the right thing, that I'm prepared to execute what it is I'm going to do. And I know you and I have talked about question asking a lot, and how that fits in, particularly with your younger players. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that and asking the questions of 8-year-old kids out there playing rugby.
Yeah, I think one, there's a couple pieces there when you start thinking about the kids. One is when you start thinking about asking questions to kids and simplifying things like that, you realize how much we overcomplicate things as adults and how much BS jargon we just throw on things constantly. And I'm not even talking business jargon, because that's, those are the money words. That's why people like to throw them out all the time, right? It's like it adds value to everything you're saying to say things like marketing and, innovation and, throwing out buzzwords all the time, right? But at a core level, there's something you're trying to communicate underneath that inside of the question. And so in the engage context, it's really funny because they don't know rugby. And so I go out there and I know what a scrum and a ruck, and I know we need to pass backwards. I know why we need to pass backwards. I know all of these different things. And if I go out and I start speaking like that, like speaking like I would talk to you about positions and strategy and all that kind of stuff, they wouldn't know what the heck we're talking about. And so you have to go on a very basic level. If I go to, you talk about very, very basic rugby, attacking lines and defensive lines. If I go and say, hey, get an attacking line, they don't know what it means. Right? Hey, what's wrong with our attacking line? How could we improve this? I don't know. What's an attacking line? Get an RV. Where's our V? Boom. Right there. They have the V. They understand it. You're dumbing it down to that level. And I think when you're asking questions, it's important to drop down the jargon a lot of the times, because jargon is what people get caught up on. We've talked about it with a handful of our different family episodes over the year of people getting caught up in the semantics, right? And I think that's one of the issues when it comes to asking questions is you don't recognize where the other person is coming from. The other person's level of jargon might be another way to put it, right? And so you go in and you go way over their head and they don't understand the question. And you start throwing out terms they don't know. Most of the time, those terms don't necessarily correlate to what the kind of answer is, right? I could ask you a question about whether it's rugby or business, and I could use a bunch of really big words, or I could say it in just plain English, right? And that plain English, if it gets a better answer from you, then that's the better question. And so it goes back to me to understanding who your audience is and what you want to get out of the conversation. If you need them to understand your question, which if you're asking somebody a question, that's probably going to be your goal, right? Then you need to make sure you're speaking their language, not talking down to them by overcomplicating it with jargon. And that's the really big key there, talking about the little kids. And I think that applies into business and everywhere else.
I agree. And I think you said something that we should all work on not using that phrase because of the label it puts on people, dumbing it down. Right. That's so now what am I saying? All those people are dummies because they don't understand it at the level I understand. That's not the intent of what you're saying.
Right.
That could also be what they're hearing in that sense. I used to, I think it was around college, I started using the Methodist Church sort of methodology of the layman's the layman's understanding. So for those of you who don't know, in the traditional Methodist church, you got, your preacher, your minister, the reverend, and then you had a dude, sometimes volunteer, sometimes paid, who was the lay reader is one title. The guy gets up and reads the Bible verse every day or every service, and maybe does some announcements and things like that. Kind of the MC, the master of ceremonies for the church. But the way I always, and maybe I got this from Pawpaw, I don't know, is so the lay reader, he's just been reading the Bible. He didn't go to school to learn about it. So he's kind of got the practical application of life. Here's my life and here's how the Bible applies to my life sort of thing. So that's the taking the ministry understanding and breaking it down so the dude, me, sitting in the pews goes, oh, sort of thing, right? And that was the way I always portrayed it. Not that my ministers, didn't have a Pastor Bob out in Pennsylvania listening to us. Still, that's part of their job is to connect. But I always felt like if you could take things and decipher it into layman's terms, and maybe there's some other terms of synonymous with that, the novice, the apprentice sort of thing, so that person who, stay in that same term of minister who, in Pastor Bob's case, has a doctorate, in religious studies. So think about how many years has he been just doing that deep dive in. And you got Joe, the layman, the lay leader, who's been reading Bible all his life and goes to church every Sunday, and maybe he's on the church council and does a little bit of extra things like that. But he ain't been to school for it. And I think that's just one of the things that I like to think of when it's, well, how do I decipher this down to help my team understand what we're trying to do without, using a bunch of terms of, what's your FPF and your FPL and your primary and alternate and tertiary and your supplemental positions and all these sort of things that people just start looking at you like, huh? I don't know what that means. But to bring us back to the asking questions, what's the response you get when you ask that question of the infamous question that everybody asks? Are there any questions? Good.
Oh my gosh. So yes, thank you for the setup on that, because that's the other piece I wanted to get to is being intentional about how you ask your questions. And there's a couple of key tricks that I learned in the rugby coaching world that I think are so critical into communicating properly with your team. The first, if you can avoid it, never ask yes or no questions. It's too simple. Leave it open. Leave your questions open ended because you don't know where people are going to run with it. Right? You want to open that up to let people kind of wander with their brain, get the ideas out, those different things there, have that genuine interaction. If you go yes or no, it's like you're going back to middle school and I got a multiple choice test. I'm just picking one, right? And everyone else is saying no, no question. All right, no. And that's how it goes. And that's the other key there with what you're talking about when you say something like any questions, is recognizing what kind of situation you're putting the audience in. So what kind of situation you're putting your team in. If you have your team in a room and you say, are there any questions? What you're really saying is, is anyone stupid enough to not understand what I just said? That's what everyone hears. And they're going, that didn't make sense, Otis, but
there's no dumb question.
I don't want to look stupid.
There's no dumb
exactly.
question.
Exactly. But then we say that.
The one that ask it.
So we have this weird thing where, you talk, actually I just recorded a video on culture talking about rhetoric versus actions, which, fits right into this. But it's that not just saying there's no stupid questions, but genuinely trying to pull stupid questions from people, like genuinely trying to pull that out. In another video I did on brainstorming, I talked about how you can literally flip the problem set around and ask for stupid solutions. We got our strategy call later, Dad. We could spend a little bit of time on that going, what is the worst way we could solve this problem? And spending time like that helps you to understand the problem better. Reframing the problem in those weird ways, changing your perspective on the problem is very easy to do if you ask the right questions. Leaving them open-ended, no yes or no's, kind of playing the devil's advocate with the question sometimes. Those different types of things can pull a lot of those answers out of your team that they're not going to give you if you give them the yes or no, where you're putting the onus on them to change and to be the quote-unquote stupid one for asking a question. If you want the questions, you need to encourage the questions.
Well, it's encouraging learning too, right? Their understanding and learning. And, I when I went through my coaching certification years ago to become a certified coach, one of the things that I learned, I never really thought about, and I probably, truthfully, did I know it? Yeah. But I really learned the power of the open-ended question and how our minds go, oh, there's space. And because there's space, I can create. I've been given authorization to create something to fulfill that space. That's the power of asking the open-ended question as opposed to, everybody got it? Yeah. Even the kid that goes, or the team member, doesn't have to be a kid, even the team member that goes, yeah, I think so. Right? As opposed to the question of, well, tell me how you would approach this. Can you share more about how your part fits in to the solution, or how your skills may benefit, the outcome, or whatever it may be? Just that little crack in the door is all it takes. Because when you do, and you said this, when you do that closed question, a yes or no question, guess what? The mind just goes, nope. What's the easiest answer? Because if I say yes, then what does that mean? Because I might have to do more. I may look like, I may be that. It's not fear of failure; it's fear of being the fool. There's our new FOMO alternative: fear of being the fool. Nobody wants to be the fool unless you've created that culture where the guy who asks that question that you were thinking in your mind, that's the same question I got, and you go, I'm not asking that. I'm not saying anything because I don't want to. Everybody will think I'm stupid. But then Fred over there asked that question. You're like, oh, thank God, thank God. Let's explore this a little bit in the dynamics of the organization. What always happens? You say that thing. Let's stay in the old habit that we all have of, hey, any questions before we go off and do this exercise? And it's crickets, crickets, crickets. And then there's one person that's brave enough that says, yeah, hey, Otis, I got a question for you, man. How do I blah, 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 blah? And then you answer that question, and all of a sudden somebody else has a question. And then somebody else has a question. What's the dynamic going on there? Do you see that with the little kids too?
Yeah, I think it's really just that kind of like social norming of once you get people to start asking questions, once you get that dialogue going, you're going to get it from everybody else. And one, if you're not great at asking questions and you're not following these tips that we're talking about, that's where having A+ star team member really helps, because that person is going to ask the questions and it helps to get everyone else moving, right? But I think I got another trick for folks out there for this that also comes from rugby, and especially with the little kids, but I'll do it with older boys also at the U of A. But the thing is, if you want people to ask questions, then you need to train them to ask questions. And that's not, sending them the link to this podcast. You can do that and they can watch this and understand things. But it's more so about how you interact with them, how you ask for feedback, how you ask them questions. If I am explaining a drill to the kids at Engage, I intentionally leave out info as much as possible. I usually will pick like 4 or 5 rules and just throw those out and then leave things out. And what happens then is the kids go, wait, he didn't say this. Does that mean I have to follow that? For a perfect example, everyone, if y'all listen to the show, you got to pass backwards in rugby, right? What about the game of ultimate rugby, Dad? Well, I didn't say you have to pass backwards.
Right.
So now you can pass forwards. And that's it. There's no boundaries. I didn't say anything about a boundary or turnovers if you go out of bounds. So now the kid's going, oh, what happens if I go out of bounds? Nothing. There's no boundaries. Perfect. And what I'm doing with that is teaching them that they can ask questions about the rules and ask questions like that by being proactive. And what that does is it creates a culture inside of the team where they're comfortable asking those questions, just like you're talking about. And then with that, you are going to get a team that not only just ask questions in this kind of formal sense, but they're critical of the things around them. They're always looking for ways to improve because they know that they're not just going to be black and white, just follow what the boss says. They know that they can go in and ask those questions. They know that they can make those changes, and that allows them to get better with that. Even the example I was saying earlier with like the V, right? A kid could go, and I could say a V, and a kid could go, well, is it a V like this or a V like this? Amazing question, right? That's the kind of stuff you want to train people to do. And the same thing goes inside of your business. You don't want to give the yes or no questions. You want to leave things open. You talk about a strategy, leave some things out. See what happens. See if people ask. And hey, here's the real trick for people out there who are scared, Dad, because I know we probably got a couple scaredy cats out there. For people that might be scared, when you're going through this, guess what happens if they don't ask those questions? You can say it. Easy, right? If they don't ask me about passing forward, I can just tell them they can pass forward. It's so easy like that. There really is maybe a little bit of a fear thing, kind of what you're talking about there, but I don't see much of a barrier to doing that as a leader. It's once you understand it and you start to build that culture, the benefits are so great, and there's not really much of a negative because worst case, you just explain things again. The amount of times I have with Engage in this exact same system, stopped a game 2 minutes in because it was terrible. And I go and say, hey, by the way, let's talk about strategy. Let's talk about rules a little bit more. And that gives them the structure that they need, but I'm still giving them that freedom to operate and freedom to experiment inside of that.
Well, I think what we're kind of coming around to is, as the leader, when you ask those questions and you create that culture, the questioning culture, if you will, is you have to be okay with conflict. Because if I think I'm the best leader and I create the best plans and I say, this is it, this is what we're doing, then anytime somebody has a question, then they're questioning, if you're not a confident leader, they're questioning my ability to lead and share that and communicate, which some people will get very upset and concerned and look at it as a personal attack and say, well, shit, I told you. Are you stupid? And that's Go
I
ahead.
got a question for you on that, because I think one of the keys, thinking about not necessarily like in the team environment, but also I was thinking, because it's a weird compliment to get, but you and I have both gotten it from guests we've had, that we're good questioners. We ask really good questions, right? Good questioners. I'm not sure if that's right, but anyway, I've thought some about that, like in the podcast context. What is it about our questions that people say are good, that our guests enjoy, and that kind of stuff? And you already touched on it's the how a lot of the times, the how and the why questions. And I think the interesting thing with that is setting up that why to where your team feels willing to share. Because a lot of the time, the why can do exactly what you're talking about there of, what are you, stupid? Why do you think that? And that's not what you want. You want to pull that understanding, because then you can compare that with your why and you can come to an actual agreement on what the situation, how best to move forward in that situation. What are your thoughts on how to kind of play that why into your team? And again, going back to like encouraging them to actually give you the feedback that you want instead of shying away from the question.
Yeah, and I think part of this whole thing is the culture that you create that exists in your organization, because there's times when we've been working together for 10 years. I know what you mean. I know what the white space between the words means. I know what the white space between the bullets and the got to do this means. So, I don't have any questions, boss. Let's just freaking get to work. Uh, that's another aspect of it. I think there's a little bit of what's going on here in different situations. As a coach, and you're trying to teach, mentor, and guide sports or people to a different level, and making sure they understand is one thing. If you're an organization and hey, this is the 10th time we've done something like this with maybe just a little tweak and adjustment, we've been working together for a long time. There's not a lot of gaps. So I think the as you move forward as an organization and approach operating with flow, one of the things that happens in that achieving the flow is everybody on the team understands how they fit in and what their role is, and even with the slight changes that may be occurring because of what you're doing here instead of what you did yesterday or whatever. That's that when you get to that point, if nobody's got questions, then they probably don't have questions. Do you need to sit there and draw it out of them? If you took your boys, let's say your U of A boys at the end of the season, and say, all right, fellas, we're going to run the alpha 4 line out.
Yep.
Got it, coach. Right? I mean,
they know what it is. They know why we call it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like, I think having that why is so important. And then I think the other way that you could kind of flip it, and this is more business context, it can happen in the sports, but to me, this is much more of a business question, or, kind of a podcast question like I was talking about, which is the reframing it to what is the limiting factor. I think is one of my favorite questions, of just going back to, it's like, okay, everything else, if you could scale all this kind of stuff, what is the thing that's preventing you from scaling? What's the thing preventing you from doing more? And actually focusing on what that limiting factor is, I think could be a really good way to reframe it, because it gives you one specific thing to attack, which is also a really good way to ask questions to get a specific actionable thing out of it, rather than just something kind of vague, right? Hey, what's going on with your job? Man, I'm busy, swamped. What am I going to do with that as a boss? I can't help you. Otis, what is the limiting factor? What is the one thing that's stopping you from doing your job better? Oh, hey, man, I send 200 emails a day. If we could hire a VA, that would save me so much time. And I'm handwriting all these ones. We could plug in AI, all this kind of stuff. I can come up with those solutions because now I actually understand your problem set. And I want to throw it over to you, Dad. I'm curious, and we didn't talk about this before the show, so we joke about the fastball right down the plate. This might be a little bit more of a curveball. But when you think back to your time,
knuckleball, I can never hit knuckleballs.
I hope it's not knuckleball. We will see though, as I work on my question. But when you think back to your time with 10th group, what kind of role do you think questions played in the dynamic of that high performance team?
That's a really good question because, you know, I don't really remember asking, kind of the kind of questions we were talking about. It was more like, all right, we got it. Let's move out. Because the culture of the organization allowed the guys in the team, the team members, to stand up and go, "Hey, boss, I'm not sure that's the right way. We need to look at it this way." Or, "Hey, boss, we've been doing it this way. Yeah, I understand you're creating the new way. Da 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 da. What's wrong with this way?" Kind of throwing the question, almost doing the same thing, and that's the beauty of that type of an organization. Is they were secure enough and confident enough, secure enough in their skills and abilities, and confident enough in who they were and their skills and abilities to perform, to say, "Hey, based on what my understanding, I think we ought to do it this way. Can you help me understand why you want to do it that way, boss?" Wow, that's powerful, right?
Yeah.
And then the other piece of this, and I've seen this working in the business realm when you create this type of an organization, is when you get to that point of, okay, yep, I hear your dissenting opinion, I appreciate that idea. You hear those sort of things, and you take, as the leader, you take that information in and you consider it, and maybe you take a piece or part of it, or maybe they didn't have the full picture, which also is a ding on you as a leader. Maybe I didn't share enough or whatever. But then I say, all right, got it. This is the way we're going to do it. And then it's 3 bags full. The alignment of the organization is like, all right, I made my recommendation. I've asked my questions back to the boss, and I understand my role better and what I'm supposed to do and what's expected of me and what's the outcome and the why and all those sort of things. Let's execute, right? And that again goes back to culture. So I think that's a key piece of this is, well, what kind of culture do you have in your organization?
Yeah. Sorry for stepping on you a bit there. But I think the last thing for me thinking about this is understanding the kind of situation you're in is so important for this. Like when we talk about leadership styles, folks, you haven't seen that episode, you can go back to a few episodes ago. But we talk about leadership styles, and the whole idea that we kind of came to at the end is how you really can't be married to anyone. You have to recognize the situation that you're in. There are times where you can pontificate and you can have weird questions that could go all sorts of different directions. There's also times where you might need to say what you're talking about right there and say, "Hey, got it? Let's go." And you have to recognize the right kind of situation for it. We were talking about this the other day that I was on a phone call, and you and I get to do this too. We might be talking, I asked you all kinds of questions on this. When you come down to Tucson on Sunday and we're having a cigar and a whiskey out in front of the hopefully significantly more built by then shed, and we're having that moment, I'm pontificating. I'm a whiskey philosopher, and I'm going to throw out some questions I'm not going to throw out on here because you know what happens if I pontificate too hard on the podcast? Dead air. You don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about. It kills the show, kills the momentum of the show. Same thing happens inside of a meeting. You start pontificating about the meaning of life inside of a meeting and all these philosophical things and all that kind of stuff, you are going to lose your team. You have to recognize when you need to be a little bit more authoritative with that and a little bit more, "Hey, got it, we need to move" type of thing. And then the real key with that is, if you're good at this and you have to build this pattern of this culture also, is your team will be okay with that because they'll know that you'll get feedback from them later. Whether it's an AAR or what it is, you're able to still pull that feedback from them. So I think that's the really big key on that I wanted to hit before we wrap up the show.
Yeah, and I thought of this earlier before I get to what I learned. Or I could just cheat and use this as what I learned as re-emphasis.
It ain't cheating. We never set up the ground rules.
That's true. I remember hearing this from Tony Robbins years ago. Ask a better question, get a better answer. And if you use that very short and simple, thank you, Tony, again for implanting that in my mind. If you use that as the leader to ensure that your team is understanding what their roles and responsibilities are, I think, man, what a culture. What a culture. If you're thinking about that, every time you ask a question, ask a better question, get a better answer. So let me rephrase that, right? Let me, how did you, why is that? How is that coming into your head? And that's the way that you want to execute this or whatever it may be. So as a leader, I think that's a great mantra to, I don't know if it's a mantra, but a great memory jar or filter. Maybe it's a filter to remind you of ask a better question, get a better answer. And I'm going to ask the same question I ask at the end of every show, though. Camden, what did you learn?
Yeah, for me, I think it's funny because to me the rugby stuff sometimes I feel like I just love rugby and that it doesn't actually apply to things and I just want to talk about it. Every now and then I have that voice in the back of my mind of like you're just blabbing about rugby. It doesn't actually apply here. The more I think about what I've learned in communication, out coaching, engage, everyone needs to be coaching little kids because it is hard to communicate to somebody who is at that level of understanding. And if you learn how to do that, then you can communicate with anybody because you can find out how to ask those simple questions, those open-ended questions to tease the answers out of people. And that's the real key there, I think. It's a pretty good, we always talk about like mechanisms in the show. Going out and coaching kids is a pretty decent mechanism to learn how to communicate better and ask better questions.
Well, that's great. And you know what, folks? You want to adopt a mechanism to help you become a better leader, go to 10xyourteam.net and you can get all of our podcast episodes, which Camden will tell you here in a minute. Or just as important, you can dive into our leadership development system, which we are currently running 3 cohorts. No, we just wrapped one up. Just wrapped up a cohort, but we're running 2 cohorts right now. And there's so much to learn there, from how to lead yourself to how to solve problems to how to lead others to how to build teams. So check that out. And then finally, if you need help growing your business, you're a CEO founder and you can't get your head out of the day-to-day operations to go release yourself to go do what you do best, which is
stuck in the whirlwind.
Yeah. You're in that putting out fires every day, so you can never look ahead to ensure that your business is moving towards your vision of success and do what you do best, which is sell the business. Then give us a call, because our fractional COOs, that's what they do. They help you free up so that you can go do what you do best and nobody else can do as well as you do in the business, and that's sell the business. Oh, Camden.
I want to, before you throw it to me, I want to add on that because we've referenced a bunch of videos. So, folks, if you're still listening to this part of the episode, go to the YouTube channel, just where you find all of these episodes, where you watched them in your truck right there. And with that on there, we have a section about the Green Beret Leadership Program free videos. And I have a video on there about brainstorming, creating culture, high performance team, high performance alignment, rather, a bunch of different things like that. We have you talking about scripting the chaos, not being a trash can kicker. Throw another one out there because I know I'm blanking on the one you referenced a little bit ago.
Heck, I don't remember.
Hey, that's all right. That's all right. But hey, folks, go there, check it out. We're putting out new videos of that all the time, usually about 1 a week, and then a masterclass every month on top of it. So go check out those free resources, those free excerpts from GBLP. Got to make sure we plug that in there.
All right, Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank you all for listening to today's episode of 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. Remember, you can watch full episodes of the show on YouTube at 10X Your Team. If you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to pass along to other lifelong learners in your tribe so that they can enjoy it too. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. As always, the full archive of episodes available at www.10xyourteam.net. Thanks again, and we'll see you all next time.